My grandson pulled me aside, his small hand trembling against mine, and his wide, innocent eyes brimming with fear. "Grandpa," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my own heart. "I've learned something terrible about my parents." Every syllable he spoke felt like a hammer striking the fragile glass of my world. I froze for a moment, the weight of dread pressing down on me. Before instinct took over, I dialed 911, my fingers shaking as adrenaline coursed through my veins. 20 minutes later, the piercing wail of sirens announced the arrival of the police. Within moments, my own son was handcuffed, escorted away, while the shock reverberated through every fiber of my being. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment sharing where you're listening from. This story is far from over. The office door shattered the tense silence, exploding open with a violence that made my heart skip. Cleveland stormed in his designer suit, wrinkled from forceful movement papers, gripped in his knuckles until they turned white. The door slammed against the wall, rattling the windows that overlooked Lake Erie, sending echoes through the room like a warning. I looked up from my quarterly reports glasses sliding down the bridge of my nose and took in his flushed, angry face. "Dad, enough?" I said calmly, though the tremor in my chest betrayed me. Cleveland's hand slammed a stack of legal documents onto my mahogany desk, the papers scattering like leaves in a storm. "You're too old for this, and you can't handle it anymore." I slowly removed my glasses, setting them down with deliberate care. Decades of hard negotiations had taught me the power of measured movements, yet no deal had ever prepared me for my own son confronting me like this, as a challenger, as a threat. "What exactly can I handle, Cleveland?" My voice was steady, though my heart beat like a war drum. He began pacing, fists clenched so tightly I imagined the skin might tear, his every step radiating frustration. "The company needs fresh leadership, modern thinking." He spat out words cutting sharper than any blade. "You're stuck in the past while competitors race ahead with digital innovation and aggressive expansion." Fresh leadership, modern thinking. Each phrase landed with a sting deeper than he could have known. I stood feeling the weight of 68 years and decades of accomplishment still commanding presence despite the tension filling the room. "And you believe you are ready to provide that leadership?" My tone was measured, controlled, though every fiber of me burned with anger. "I know I am," he said, stopping mid-step, leaning forward with palms pressing into my desk. The family photo of him at graduation trembled under his insistence. "I've been ready for years. You just refuse to see it because you can't let go." The sunlight of late afternoons streamed through the blinds, casting stark shadows across his face, hardening the features I once knew so well. When had my ambitious boy grown into this relentless, demanding stranger? "Ready." My voice remained level, but inside pressure built like a dam about to burst. "Yesterday you wanted to take out massive loans for untested technology. Last month you suggested firing half our workforce to boost short-term profits." I said, letting each word hang in the air like thunder. "That's not leadership, Cleveland. That's recklessness." He straightened, a jaw tightening. "That's called adapting to survive. While you're protecting every employee like their family, our competitors are streamlining operations and maximizing returns. We could triple revenue in 2 years if you just step aside." I circled the desk until I was directly in front of him, letting the years of authority I carried fill the space between us. "Step aside and destroy everything I've built in the process." I demanded, letting disbelief and hurt edge my words. "Everything we've built," he corrected sharply, voice rising like a storm. "I've worked here 15 years. I know this business inside and out. The only thing holding Thompson Manufacturing back is your stubborn refusal to embrace change." The accusation hung like smoke between us, thick and suffocating. I searched his face for the traces of the boy who once followed me into the garage, fascinated by every tool, every process, every lesson I offered. That boy had admired my work ethic, my philosophy. The man before me now saw all that as obstacles, as chains to be broken. "I'm not ready to retire, Cleveland." I said, my voice steady but my heart hammering in my chest. "The company still needs a leader who understands the 21st century. Someone who knows the history of this business, who can carry it forward without sacrificing everything we built." Cleveland's fist slammed onto my mahogany desk with a force that made the brass nameplate leap like a startled bird. The echo lingered in the office, vibrating in my bones. "I'm not asking permission anymore, Dad," he spat, eyes blazing. "I'm telling you how this is going to work." Silence fell over the office, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of traffic 20 floors below. I felt an icy knot settle deep in my chest, a stark recognition of what this confrontation truly was. This wasn't a mere discussion about business strategy or succession planning. No, this was a declaration of war, a war I hadn't expected to be waged in my own office by my own son. "Is that a threat?" I asked, my voice calm, but each word weighed with steel. Cleveland straightened his tie and smoothed his jacket, attempting composure, though I could see the tension coiled beneath the surface. "It's a reality check," he said, sharp and unwavering. "You can make this transition graceful, or I can make it happen another way. But make no mistake, it's going to happen." He moved toward the door, then paused, hand on the handle, as though to punctuate his ultimatum. "Think about it, Dad. Think about what's best for everyone." And with that, the door slammed behind him, rattling the window frames and leaving a hollow void in its wake. I was left alone, staring at the scattered legal documents that had ignited the storm. My hands hovered over the papers, uncertain, not quite steady, as I finally reached for my car keys. The 20-minute drive through Cleveland's quiet, tree-lined suburbs gave me too much time to replay his words over and over, each syllable cutting deeper. "You're too old for this. I'm not asking permission anymore." By the time I pulled into my driveway in Shaker Heights, the phrases had etched themselves into my mind like grooves on a broken record, relentless and unyielding. Inside, I hung my coat in the front closet with mechanical precision movements, carefully measured, almost ritualistic. The house felt unusually still, eerily silent after the chaos of the office. No television chatter, no phone ringing, just the solemn, steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a metronome marking the passage of time, and my growing unease. I poured 2 fingers of whiskey from the crystal decanter on the bar card in my study. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted it, a subtle betrayal of the storm within. Settling into my leather armchair, I was surrounded by decades of family memories, each photograph and memento a reminder of who we once were. Wedding pictures of my children, vacation snapshots that captured moments of laughter and love, and there Cleveland's high school graduation portrait, that proud, confident smile I remembered from a younger, eager boy who had once organized my tools in the garage, fascinated by every cog, every lever, every lesson I offered. When had everything changed? When had the son who once marveled at the mechanics of the business become this stranger, this adversary? My gaze drifted to the old company photos lined neatly on the bookshelf. There we were in 1995, standing in front of our tiny rented office, Cleveland, beside me with grease on his hands from helping move equipment. He had been 22 then, fresh out of college, eager to start from the bottom, ready to learn. We had worked side by side until midnight, countless nights drafting expansion strategies, celebrating small victories, and dreaming of what the company could become. The sacrifices, the sweat, the relentless drive those early years were etched into my very being. And now it felt as if all of that history was being dismissed with a single defiant slap of his hand on my desk. Missing family dinners because a client needed immediate attention. Working 80-hour weeks to secure contracts that would keep us afloat. Taking financial risks that left me staring at the ceiling in the dead of night, heart racing, mind spinning with calculations. Every decision carried the weight of promises I had made to my family, the promise of stability, of security, of a future where they would never go wanting. The specter of failure hovered constantly, a silent predator, reminding me that one wrong move could unravel everything I had built. From that cramped garage startup to a company employing 300 dedicated staff, from $20,000 in annual revenue to $20 million, every achievement had been painstakingly earned. Each milestone was the product of meticulous planning, patient relationship building, and steady methodical growth. Not the aggressive, flash-driven tactics that Cleveland preferred, but sustainable progress that created a foundation strong enough to weather storms. Perhaps that was the problem. Perhaps I had made it too comfortable, too predictable for him. Cleveland had never faced the gut-wrenching uncertainty, the sleepless nights, the fear that our dream might collapse overnight. He had joined the company when success was already a given, when paychecks were guaranteed, and expansion seemed inevitable. He had inherited confidence without earning wisdom, ambition without understanding the cost of failure. And yet I could not fully silence the questions gnawing at me. Was I being fair to him? Was my stubborn grip on the reins truly for the company's sake? Or was it because I could not envision my identity without the role I had carved for myself over decades? The questions circled relentlessly in my mind like circling vultures, picking apart every decision, every sacrifice I had made over the last 5 years. I reached for my phone, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing into my chest, and dialed John Morrison's number. John had been my business mentor, a steadfast friend and advisor for 3 decades. He had witnessed my triumphs, my missteps, my tireless commitment to this company, and I trusted him to provide perspective untainted by family loyalty or personal pride. Bill John answered, his voice warm and familiar, even at this late hour, a comforting tether to reason. "Everything all right?" he asked gently. "I had a confrontation with Cleveland today." I said, my words measured, careful not to betray the full storm brewing inside me. "He wants immediate control of the company." I recounted the events of the office without admitting just how deeply his words had shaken me. John was quiet for a long moment. "Family business transitions are never simple," he said finally. "How do you feel about his readiness?" I let out a long sigh, swirling the amber whiskey in my glass, watching the lamplight catch the liquid like fire. "Honestly, I think he's skilled, intelligent, but impatient. He wants to transform everything overnight without understanding the risks involved, without appreciating the history that brought us here." I paused, staring at the golden liquid, seeing not just the whiskey, but reflections of decades of choices, of sleepless nights, of sacrifices made to keep people employed, to keep promises. But maybe, I admitted softly, almost to myself, maybe I'm just afraid of change. "You've always been protective of your people and your principles," John reminded me gently. "That's not a flaw. It's why the company survived when others would have crumbled. But you also have to ask yourself, can you guide him, or is this your moment to let go?" I didn't answer immediately. The question hung in the air, heavier than the bottle of whiskey on my desk, heavier than the memories lining the walls of my home. Could I release control without losing myself? Could I accept a future where my son led, even if his vision differed from mine? Or would the years of sacrifice and sweat make that impossible? "That's not a weakness, Bill," John said, his voice calm, yet tinged with the hard-earned wisdom of decades in business. "But Cleveland's generation approaches business differently. The question is whether his methods can preserve what you've built while adapting to the challenges of the modern world." We spoke for another 20 minutes, exploring every scenario I could imagine, every risk, every opportunity. John shared stories of other family businesses he had observed, some that had transitioned seamlessly from one generation to the next, others that had crumbled under the weight of impatience, pride, or misunderstandings. Each tale seemed to mirror my own fears, reflecting back the uncertainty I felt about the future of the company and my relationship with my son. By the end of the call, I felt a flicker of validation. My concerns were acknowledged, my perspective respected, and yet I was no closer to a solution. I hung up the phone heavy in my hand and poured the last of the whiskey into my glass. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth settle through me, and glanced at my watch. 8:30. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and I needed rest before facing whatever Cleveland had planned next. I felt a steely determination, but it was tempered by wariness, as if I were a general preparing for a battle I had hoped to avoid my entire life. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The early sunlight filtered through the windows at a gentler angle, bathing the room in a softer, more hopeful glow than the harsh afternoon glare that had illuminated Cleveland's flushed, angry face yesterday. I needed time to restore order, to regain a sense of control. By 8:15, I had reorganized my desk, cleared away the scattered papers from our confrontation, and smoothed out the tiny ripples of tension that lingered in the air. A gentle knock at the door interrupted my review of emails. Cleveland entered carrying a silver service tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a plate of pastries from the bakery near his house. His posture was subdued, almost apologetic, a stark contrast to the aggressive stance he had taken just 24 hours earlier. "Dad, I brought coffee," he said softly, setting the tray carefully on my desk while avoiding direct eye contact. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I was out of line." The aroma of fresh coffee filled the office, mingling with the soft morning light. Cleveland's movements were deliberate, controlled, each gesture measured as if he had rehearsed this approach over and over. I watched him closely, searching for traces of genuine remorse beneath the surface, trying to distinguish it from calculated strategy. "I spent last night thinking about what you said," Cleveland continued, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes, though younger and impatient in spirit, held a sincerity I hadn't expected. "You're right about patience and wisdom. I've been so focused on growth, on chasing opportunities, that I forgot to appreciate what you've already built." Instead of looming over me as he had the day before, he sat down across from my desk. His body language was respectful, open, rather than demanding. And in that moment, memories from decades past began to stir, a memory of him, at 16, eagerly organizing my tools in the garage, asking endless questions, watching intently as I demonstrated each process. "You told me that real success comes from understanding every component before trying to improve the machine," he said quietly, a small, thoughtful smile tugging at his lips. I felt a pang of familiarity, the memory hazy yet unmistakable, like a scent from long ago or a melody half remembered. Despite the haze of countless father-son conversations over the years, Cleveland's reference to our shared past struck a chord deep in my chest. It awakened the parental pride that had guided my sacrifices for 3 decades, the late nights, the relentless work, the sleepless worry over every contract, every decision. And in that simple acknowledgement of our shared history, I felt something shift, a tentative bridge forming across the chasm of conflict, hinting that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward together. I accepted the coffee cup he offered, feeling the comforting warmth seep into my hands. The liquid was perfect, precisely the temperature I preferred, with a rich, full-bodied blend that carried the subtle notes of chocolate and caramel I had come to associate with productive morning meetings. The aroma reminded me of years past, of early discussions with clients and employees that had shaped Thompson Manufacturing into the company it was today. I looked at Cleveland, studying him with a mixture of caution and hope. "You've given this considerable thought," I said slowly, testing the waters. "More than I should have needed to." He admitted, his tone calm and reflective, eyes steady on mine. He lifted his cup in a small, deliberate gesture. "I want to earn your trust, not demand it." His words struck a chord I hadn't realized had been frayed. It was one thing to see him humbled, another to hear him articulate his desire to prove himself rather than assert authority by inheritance. "If you're willing to work with me on a gradual transition plan," he continued, "I promise to honor what Thompson Manufacturing represents." We spent the next hour immersed in conversation, a rhythm of questions and answer, analysis and reflection. Cleveland asked about client relationships, manufacturing processes, and employee engagement, showing genuine interest in the very details he had once dismissed as outdated methodology. There was an attentiveness, a focus that suggested he had spent the night reconsidering not just the company, but his approach to leadership itself. He nodded eagerly as I outlined my vision for sustainable growth over the next 2 to 3 years. "I understand now," he said, glancing at the notes he had taken, "that patience isn't the same as stagnation. Your approach builds lasting foundations instead of chasing temporary profits." The coffee in my hand tasted even richer now, infused with a warmth that reminded me of mornings long ago, when ambition and hope had filled the air alongside the smell of roasted beans and paper contracts. Each sip carried a faint reassurance, as though the company's future, while uncertain, could be shaped carefully, deliberately, without reckless shortcuts. Cleveland agreed with every suggestion I made, acknowledging the wisdom in gradual expansion and the importance of employee loyalty programs. His transformation seemed almost too perfect, too seamless, but I wanted desperately to believe that it was real. I felt a cautious optimism bloom within me, a fragile spark of hope that perhaps we could bridge the gap between his ambition and my experience. "There's a project with Morrison Industries that would be perfect for you to lead," I said, carefully choosing my words. "It involves the kind of innovative thinking you've always championed, but within established frameworks that protect our core values." Cleveland's eyes lit up, the spark unmistakable. "I'd be honored to take that on," he said earnestly. "Thank you for trusting me with something so important." As our meeting drew to a close, he gathered the empty coffee cups and the pastry plate, moving with the same deliberate care he had displayed throughout our conversation. There was a humility in his movements, a tangible effort to show respect and appreciation. Watching him leave my office carrying the silver tray, I felt something I hadn't in months: hope. Hope that we could reconcile our differences, that his ambition and my experience could coexist, guiding the company into a future neither of us could have built alone. The bitter aftertaste of coffee lingered briefly on my tongue, but I dismissed it as inconsequential, a reminder of the difference between office brewing and professional preparation. For now, I allowed myself to feel optimism about the family, the company, and the future we might share. By 5:45 p.m., the familiar punctuality of the day returned, the same rhythm I had maintained for 30 years, marking the steady passage of time in a world that suddenly seemed a little more promising. I saved the quarterly projection spreadsheet and reached for my coat hanging behind the office door, intent on leaving for the day. But as I stood, the first wave hit me without warning, a sudden dizziness that made the room tilt and spin, forcing me to grab the edge of my desk. Papers cascaded to the hardwood floor, fluttering like startled birds. This wasn't the usual fatigue from long hours or mounting stress. The room shifted unnaturally, as though I had stepped off a carousel too quickly and been rejected by gravity itself. I pressed my palm against the cool, solid wood of the desk, willing my body to find its equilibrium. The air conditioning's familiar hum seemed amplified, almost piercing, competing with a sharp ringing in my ears. A slow, persistent nausea followed, curling through my stomach like an unrelenting tide. My tie felt suddenly constrictive, my collar a cage. I loosened both with trembling fingers, desperate for air, despite the office's comfortable temperature. Hands shaking, I reached for the water bottle beside my monitor. What's happening to me? I forced myself to stand again, but my legs felt disobedient, disconnected from my intentions. The familiar view of Lake Erie wavered outside the windows, undulating like heat mirages in the summer sun. A metallic taste coated my tongue, bitter and unnerving. This wasn't stress or overwork. Something was genuinely wrong. Even the intercom required 2 attempts before my hands obeyed well enough to make a coherent call. By some small mercy, I could still think clearly. I instructed the taxi driver, providing my address and handling payment, with hands that were steadier than they felt. As we pulled out of Thompson Manufacturing's parking garage, I studied the downtown Cleveland skyline through the rear window, its buildings familiar, steady, enduring. So unlike my fragile, betraying body. 30 years of building that company, shaping it from scratch. And now, at the precise moment when everything seemed aligned with Cleveland's newfound maturity, my body faltered. The taxi driver's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "You all right back there, sir?" "Fine. Thank you," I replied, gripping the door handle for stability as we merged onto the highway toward Shaker Heights. The late afternoon sunlight struck the car with an almost cruel brilliance, forcing me to close my eyes and lean back into the headrest. Tomorrow will be better, I told myself, clinging to the mantra like a lifeline. It has to be. The driver guided me up the front steps of my house, accepting an extra $20 for his patience. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar comfort of my home brought immediate psychological relief, even if my body continued to rebel. Every muscle ached with exhaustion, every nerve seemed overstimulated, yet the walls, the furniture, the muted sounds of the neighborhood, they whispered stability, grounding me in something I could trust. I prepared a light dinner, chicken soup from a can with saltine crackers, meals reserved for real illness. Sitting in my living room chair, I felt marginally better. The nausea had eased from a constant churn to occasional waves, and my hands no longer shook relentlessly. I told myself firmly, early bedtime. Rest. Tomorrow I would be back to normal. By 10:30, I was under the covers in my familiar bedroom, expecting the restorative sleep that had served me reliably for decades. The digital clock's red numbers were the only light in the room, steady and unyielding. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the events of the day, the stress, the fear creeping into every corner of my mind. Then at 11:45, I awoke, a sudden surge of alertness and unease propelling me upright. My pulse raced, not from illness, but from something deeper, something unresolved. The night had delivered no answers, only questions and a sense of looming urgency. A quiet vengeance rose within me, a determination that would not allow this weakness, this betrayal by my own body, to dictate the future. Tomorrow, I thought, tomorrow I would reclaim control of my health, of the company, and of the family I had spent a lifetime building. The nausea returned with compound interest, hitting me harder than the night before, accompanied by a pounding headache that felt like a crew of jackhammers was tearing through my skull. Every blink sent sparks across my vision. Every breath carried a twinge of discomfort. I stumbled toward the bathroom for water and aspirin, my hand gripping the doorframe like a lifeline. By 1:20 a.m., the second awakening had arrived. The headache had intensified, now joined by cold sweats that dripped down my back and made my shirt cling uncomfortably to my skin. I sank to the bathroom floor, pressing my cheek against the cool tile wall, hoping the sensation would anchor me through the next wave. Minutes crawled by, each one heavier than the last. By 3:15 a.m., the worst episode yet overtook me. Dry heaving over the toilet, head pounding, as if the inside of my skull were being hammered from within, every muscle taut with exhaustion. Every position was uncomfortable. Every motion summoned fresh misery. I eventually settled on the edge of my bed, staring at the clock's glowing numbers, counting the agonizing minutes between waves. This wasn't normal. This wasn't aging. This wasn't stress. This wasn't overwork. Something else was at play. I retrieved my home blood pressure monitor from the nightstand drawer. The numbers were elevated, not yet dangerous, but higher than my usual baseline. My temperature registered slightly above normal, though still shy of fever. Panic flirted at the edges of my thoughts. By 4:30, I found myself making mental lists for the doctor I had avoided for over 2 years. Symptom onset, late afternoon. Duration ongoing. Severity moderate to severe. Possible causes: food poisoning, viral infection, stress reaction, medication interaction, aging-related episode. I resisted the temptation to dive down the rabbit hole of internet self-diagnosis, knowing how easily fear could metastasize there. Instead, I focused on observable facts, timeline, specific sensations progression, from minor discomfort to significant illness. Dawn finally arrived at 6:00 a.m., bringing modest relief. The headache had dulled to a manageable thrum, and my stomach felt stable enough to permit cautious movement. I showered slowly, letting hot water wash away the residue of the night's torment, the steam wrapping me in fragile comfort. Fresh clothes felt like armor against a body that had been so thoroughly betrayed. Toast and weak tea made up breakfast bland fuel to carry me into a day whose challenges remained unknown. I resolved to schedule a doctor's appointment if symptoms persisted, but first the pressing demands of the company. The drive to Thompson Manufacturing required heightened concentration. My grip on the steering wheel was firm, each corner negotiated with meticulous care, my mind balancing alertness with residual fatigue. When I arrived, Cleveland's red sedan was already parked in the lot, which struck me as either coincidental or troublingly thoughtful. The office smelled faintly of coffee and paper, familiar and grounding. By 9:30, I had reviewed 3 urgent emails and signed 2 contracts, functioning at perhaps 70% of my normal capacity, but functioning nonetheless. I massaged my temples, willing the persistent mental haze to lift, when a soft knock at the office door interrupted me. "Morning, Dad," Cleveland said, stepping inside. He carried an elaborate coffee service, not just simple cups, but a thermal carafe, an assortment of pastries, and what appeared to be carefully arranged vitamin supplements on a silver tray. His eyes scanning my face softened. "You look a bit pale," he observed, voice measured but concerned. I exhaled slowly, swallowing the tension that had tightened my chest. Even as weakness lingered from the night's ordeal, there was a thread of reassurance in his presence, a reminder that maybe amidst illness and fatigue, the bridge between our worlds, my experience and his ambition, wasn't yet broken. "Everything okay?" Cleveland asked, his voice carefully modulated, carrying just enough concern to pierce through the fog of my lingering malaise. The aroma of the coffee he had brought hit my stomach like a physical blow, rich and heavy, tangling with the nausea that had refused to leave me since the previous night. My body recoiled with surprising intensity, as though recognizing some invisible threat my conscious mind couldn't define. "Not today, son," I thought grimly. Still feeling under the weather, I admitted, my voice steady despite the tremor running through my hands. Cleveland's expression flickered. Was it disappointment? Frustration? The emotion passed too quickly for me to analyze, replaced almost instantly by an exaggerated concern that bordered on theatrical. He set the tray down, carefully leaning forward with the posture of a man trained to observe, to diagnose. What kind of symptoms? He asked, the curiosity in his tone, bordering on clinical. Hope has nursing experience. I reminded myself, a thought that both reassured and unsettled me. Cleveland's suggestion came with subtle persuasion, hinting at remedies she might recommend if I describe my condition. General malaise, headache, nausea, fatigue. I said, keeping the description minimal. I refused to appear weak when the company needed strength. Probably just pushed myself too hard lately. Cleveland tilted his head, his pivot seamless, almost rehearsed, as if he had anticipated every possible response. Or maybe you need proper nutrition and family support, he suggested, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Hope's making her famous healing pot roast tonight. Why don't you join us for dinner? Ethan's been asking about Grandpa. The mention of my grandson tugged at exactly the right heartstring. I hadn't seen Ethan in 2 weeks, and the boy's boundless enthusiasm always had a way of lifting my spirits during difficult periods. Cleveland seemed to sense the emotional leverage subtly working without manipulation. He navigated the conversation toward warmth and connection. She has these special recipes from her nursing days, he continued, as if reading my hesitation. Foods that actually help recovery instead of just filling your stomach. His words struck me differently than any corporate strategy. They carried the promise of comfort, of human care that no spreadsheet or quarterly projection could provide. Cleveland wrote something on a business card and slid it across my desk. 7. 0. Hope insists that proper family meals cure more ailments than most medications. He said, his tone casual but precise. My logical mind noted the convenience and invitation timed with exactness, but my heart, long starved of company in the wake of sleepless nights, warmed at the thought. Ethan's bright, eager face floated into my imagination, accompanied by Hope's genuine warmth. The laughter and chatter of family gatherings, a stark contrast to the cold isolation of the previous night. That sounds wonderful, I said, managing a small, grateful smile. Thank you for thinking of me. I pocketed the card embossed with their Westlake address. Tell Hope I appreciate her concern. Cleveland gathered the untouched coffee service. His movements slightly hurried, though his carefully calibrated smile never faltered. She'll be thrilled. Ethan's been working on a drawing project he wants to show you. I allowed myself a rare, unguarded moment of anticipation. Despite the lingering discomfort, the nausea, the headache, and the fatigue, the thought of family, of a warm home, a grandson's laughter, the smell of pot roast filling the air, brought genuine emotional relief. 7:00 sharp, I reminded myself, clinging to the simple promise of human connection. After Cleveland left, I remained at my desk staring at his handwritten invitation. The coffee had gone cold, the pastries untouched, yet the card in my hand carried something richer than caffeine or sugar, a fragile bridge back to family, to hope, to normalcy. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of anticipation, a tentative reassurance that perhaps this evening would bring more than nourishment, it might bring healing. The gesture felt at once generous and curiously convenient. My son had never before displayed much interest in my health, never asked after my well-being beyond the perfunctory, "Are you all right?" in passing. Yet here he was, orchestrating medical consultation suggestions, crafting therapeutic dinner invitations, and showing a level of attentiveness that bordered on meticulous, all within 24 hours of my sudden unsettling illness. Gratitude and suspicion sat uncomfortably side by side in my chest, a strange duet that made my emotions uneven and restless. I tucked the card into my jacket pocket, feeling a tentative warmth at the thought of Ethan's excitement and the way his youthful hopes would nurture attention to my recovery. The 30-minute drive through Cleveland's quiet suburbs to Westlake offered me a moment of reflection. The rhythmic motion of the car, the familiar suburban streets lined with well-established trees, helped clear my head, despite the lingering fatigue from the mysterious illness that had left me drained. Cleveland's contemporary home came into view, a polished exterior pristine, landscaping a subtle reflection of the prosperity that Thompson Manufacturing had afforded our family over the years. The driveway's cobblestone shine, the perfectly trimmed hedges, they all whispered order, control, and meticulous planning. Before I could even ring the bell, Ethan burst through the front door with uncontained energy. His 10-year-old vitality stood in sharp contrast to my deliberate, cautious steps up the walkway. "Grandpa," he shouted, launching himself into my arms with a ferocity and warmth that made every sacrifice I had ever made feel instantly worthwhile. "There's my favorite grandson," I said, ruffling his sandy hair, feeling a genuine spark of joy for the first time in 2 days. The tension of the past nights, the illness, the lingering weakness, the sleepless hours, slipped for a moment, replaced by the pure, unfiltered elation of his presence. "What have you been up to?" I asked, my voice catching slightly in surprise at the vigor with which he moved around me. Through the open floor plan, the inviting aromas of roasting meat and aromatic herbs drifted from the kitchen, promising a feast of both comfort and nourishment. Hope and Cleveland worked in a silent, practiced rhythm, Hope stirring a fragrant concoction on the stove, her movements deliberate and confident, while Cleveland arranged place settings with a precision I hadn't known he possessed. For a brief, almost magical moment, the house radiated harmony and warmth, a stark contrast to the isolation and anxiety of the previous night. "Come see my new game," Grandpa Ethan urged, tugging me toward the living room couch with a forceful but endearing enthusiasm. His energy was infectious, temporarily overshadowing the lingering weakness in my hands and the occasional waves of nausea that still threatened to derail my composure. We settled onto the plush sectional together, Ethan launching into an explanation of the game, with painstaking patience, guiding me through complex rules about building cities and managing resources as though he had been rehearsing this moment for weeks. I found myself genuinely engaged, the fog of fatigue lifting slightly under the influence of his enthusiasm and the soft glow of the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Dinner in 20 minutes," Cleveland called from the kitchen, his voice bright yet tinged with something I couldn't quite identify, perhaps a hint of strain beneath a carefully maintained cheerfulness. "Hope's making her famous healing pot roast specifically for Dad's recovery." The words struck me with a mixture of gratitude, relief, and lingering wariness. But for the first time since the onset of my mysterious illness, I felt a tentative sense of hope. Surrounded by my family, enveloped in the warmth of their care, and the familiar scent of home-cooked comfort, I allowed myself to believe that the night ahead might bring more than just sustenance. It might bring healing, connection, and a rare moment of peace. Ethan's excitement faltered almost imperceptibly. His small hands tightened around the game controller, and he glanced nervously toward the kitchen before returning his gaze to the plastic buttons under his fingers. Something had shifted in his expression, a subtle unease I had never noticed before, as if the mention of dinner had dredged up a memory too heavy for a 10-year-old to bear alone. "Everything okay, buddy?" I asked, leaning forward slightly, trying to match the quiet urgency in his eyes. He started fidgeting with the controller, pressing buttons absent-mindedly without actually playing the game. My chest tightened, not from my lingering illness, but from an unnameable worry that radiated off my grandson in palpable waves. Hope appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "How are you feeling, Bill?" "Any improvement since yesterday?" Her tone was warm, caring, but there was something else, a flicker in her eyes that suggested she was measuring my response, evaluating it with subtle precision, rather than simply sharing concern. "Better, thank you. This family time is exactly what I needed," I said with a forced smile, though my attention remained fixed on Ethan, whose nervous fidgeting seemed to grow more pronounced with each passing second. "Grandpa," Ethan said suddenly, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that made my pulse quicken. He set the controller aside and turned toward me, his young face contorted into a seriousness far beyond his years. "I need to tell you something very important." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it, son?" I whispered back instinctively, leaning closer, lowering my voice to match his intensity. Ethan glanced toward the kitchen, then back at me. "I heard my parents talking about putting drops in your food. They said it would make you sick, so you'd give them the company." The words tumbled out in a frantic rush, each one striking my mind like a hammer to glass. The room seemed to contract, the air thickening as the world narrowed to the small, trembling figure of my grandson before me. Everything I had believed about family loyalty, Cleveland's apparent transformation, Hope's nurturing concern collapsed in that single moment. My stomach churned not from lingering illness, but from shock, betrayal, and a rising tide of anger. "What exactly did you hear?" I asked, keeping my voice low but steady, though. Inside, every nerve screamed. Ethan's voice trembled as he recounted the conversation. "Mom, she was mixing something into soup. Dad said it would make you weak, so you couldn't run the business anymore. They're trying to hurt you, Grandpa." I don't want them to hurt you. I took his small, quivering hands in mine, feeling their tremors mirror the earthquake inside me. My own body shook, not from nausea, not from fever, but from controlled rage and disbelief. You did the right thing telling me, I said, holding his gaze and squeezing gently. He nodded solemnly, his eyes wide with trust and fear. Can you promise me something very important? Anything, son, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Don't tell your parents we had this conversation. Let me handle this, okay? His plea, fragile yet unwavering, struck me to the core. You're safe, and I'm going to make sure we're both protected. I squeezed his hands again, harder this time, anchoring both him and myself. Go on, I urged. I excused myself, the words catching in my throat. I need to use the bathroom for a minute. The guest bathroom offered the privacy I desperately needed to absorb the gravity of Ethan's revelation. I locked the door behind me, breathing in slow, measured gasps. My hands were no longer trembling from lingering illness. They shook from controlled fury. My own son, my own blood, plotting to poison me over a company I had built for decades. I pulled out my cell phone, checking the signal with meticulous care before dialing 911. Every ordinary sound from the kitchen, Hope humming Cleveland opening and closing cabinet doors, now carried sinister undertones. The ordinary domesticity of dinner preparation had transformed into a tableau of betrayal and danger. 911. What's your emergency? The operator asked, calm and routine. My son is trying to poison me. I said each word, feeling surreal as it left my mouth. Yet the clarity of Ethan's terrified confession left no room for doubt. My pulse thundered in my ears as I repeated the details, my mind racing with disbelief, fear, and the bitter sting of betrayal. I'm at his house right now. 1247, Oak Street in Westlake. I whispered into the phone, each word measured precise as though the slightest slip could betray my presence. Sir, are you in immediate danger? The dispatcher asked. They're preparing dinner, I said, my voice low but clear, one ear straining for any sound approaching the bathroom door. My grandson, he overheard them, discussing putting something in my food. They've been doing this for 2 days. I need officers here immediately. Units are dispatching to your location. The operator assured me, their calm professionalism a tether in the storm of panic raging through my mind. Can you avoid eating anything they offer you? The voice asked. Yes, I replied firmly, forcing control into every syllable. I can delay, but please hurry. There's a child here, my 10-year-old grandson. He's the one who warned me. The dispatcher guided me, asking structured questions, helping me organize the critical details, exact address, number of people in the house, potential weapons, the timing of suspicious activity. Each answer I gave carved the scene into sharper focus, crystallizing the nightmare that had been forming since Ethan's confession. Units are en route, the dispatcher said. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes. Remain calm. Do not let them know you've called the police. I flushed the toilet and ran water in the sink, the mundane noise masking the tempest of fear and calculation within me. My mind raced Cleveland's aggressive, demanding pursuit of control, Hope's medical knowledge, the suspicious timing of yesterday's illness following their morning coffee ritual. Every piece fit together, forming a horrifying mosaic of betrayal and danger. Checking my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I forced my expression into neutral territory. No tremors, no panic, just calm, measured composure. In 15 minutes, my family's carefully constructed deception would be shattered, but Ethan would be safe. That had to be enough. I opened the door, stepping carefully into the hallway, each footfall deliberate. Cleveland's voice called from the dining room, casual, almost cheerful. Dad, come join us. Hope has everything ready and it smells incredible. The man who had once organized my tools in the garage, who had peppered me with endless questions about business strategy, who had hugged me at his wedding and wept with me at Ethan's birth, now stood on the other side of that door, calculating doses and timing, plotting to end my life for the company I had built. My stomach churned, my pulse thundered, but I walked toward the dining room with steady, controlled steps, preparing to perform the role of a compliant father, a guest at his own potential execution. Every movement was deliberate, every breath measured. My mind cataloged contingencies, where to stand, how to observe without revealing suspicion, how to maintain the illusion of calm while silently counting down the minutes until backup arrived. The familiar sense of roasting meat and herbs now carried a dark irony nourishment masking danger. I reminded myself Ethan is safe. That thought, fragile and shining, was the only thing steadying me against the tidal wave of betrayal, fear, and disbelief. I squared my shoulders, held my chin high, and entered the dining room, the weight of 3 decades of fatherhood and betrayal pressing down with almost unbearable intensity. Tonight's survival was not just physical, it was moral, emotional, and urgent. Cleveland had transformed their dining room into what felt like an elaborate dinner theater, every detail meticulously arranged to create an illusion of warmth and familial care. Cloth napkins were folded with precision. The good china, usually reserved for holidays or special occasions, gleamed under the overhead lights, reflecting the soft glow of the chandelier. Steam rose from serving bowls fanned around a central bouquet of fresh flowers, filling the room with the scent of roasted meat, fresh herbs, and an almost intoxicating sense of domestic perfection. My stomach churned violently, though the sensation had little to do with the lingering fatigue or nausea from yesterday. It was a visceral reaction to the performance unfolding before me. "The guest of honor takes the head of the table," Cleveland announced with theatrical flourish, guiding me toward the chair facing the kitchen, as if this were a scripted play and I the unwilling actor. The weight of the moment pressed down on me with suffocating intensity. "May this meal restore Dad's strength and bring us closer together." The irony struck me with near physical force. I lifted my own glass in response, but did not drink, aware that Cleveland's eyes tracked every subtle movement I made. Each inhale carried the rich aroma of the soup's steam, yet beneath it I caught a strange, bitter undertone that sent a shiver down my spine. Something was wrong, and I could feel it in every nerve. "I'm not very hungry tonight," I said politely, pushing the bowl slightly away, keeping my tone measured. I reminded myself to maintain calm, to appear unthreatened, even as my senses screamed caution. "You need nourishment to recover properly," Cleveland said, concern threading through his words, though I detected a sharpened edge beneath the practiced softness. "Hope spent hours preparing this specifically for your condition," he added, leaning subtly closer, his eyes fixed on mine. "The soup contains nutrients your body desperately needs." Hope chimed in, stepping closer with an almost imperceptible sway toward my chair, her voice lowering in an authoritative, nurturing cadence. "Without proper nutrition, your immune system can't fight whatever's been making you sick." I maintained my polite refusal, but Cleveland's patience began to show cracks. The tension in the air thickened like smoke curling from an unseen fire. Each gesture, each word, each carefully orchestrated motion felt less like care and more like a trap. Every instinct screamed that I was standing in a theater of danger, and the stakes had never felt higher. I sat rigid, my hands folded over the edge of the table, every fiber of my being alert as the clock ticked silently, counting down the minutes until my rescue arrived. His jaw tightened when I declined a second time, and I caught him exchanging a fleeting, desperate glance with Hope. Their careful plan, meticulously rehearsed over days, was unraveling because their intended victim refused to cooperate. The tension in the room was almost tangible, pressing down on my chest with the weight of betrayal. "Dad, you have to eat something," Cleveland said, his voice sharper, now imbued with the same cold authority he had wielded during our office confrontation. "You've been sick for 2 days. This soup, it will help." "I'm not hungry," I replied firmly, my voice cutting through the carefully orchestrated calm. The firmness in my tone surprised even me, but instinct had overridden courtesy. Both Cleveland and Hope froze, their bodies stiffening as if the universe itself had defied their intentions. Then, breaking through the suffocating tension, came the unmistakable sound of car doors slamming outside. My heart skipped a beat. Heavy, purposeful footsteps approached the front walkway, followed by a knock so authoritative it reverberated through the house, freezing everyone mid-motion. "Police, open the door," a commanding voice barked. Cleveland's face drained of color. His eyes darted between me and Hope, panic overtaking his calculated composure. "Who called the police?" His voice cracked the question, dripping with accusation, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. Hope's ladle fell from her hand with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. Ethan, wide-eyed, slipped from his chair and hurried to my side, his small hands gripping mine, seeking the protection he had always known I could provide. This is Westlake Police Department. We need to speak with the residents immediately. Cleveland Thompson opened this door immediately. The voice was resolute, leaving no room for argument, no space for manipulation. Cleveland stumbled toward the front entrance, his face ashen sweat beating at his temple. Hope stood frozen, her hands trembling, as the reality of the situation crystallized. The meticulously arranged dinner, once a symbol of domestic care, now felt like a trap exposed under harsh light. 3 officers entered with swift, practiced efficiency badges glinting under the chandelier's warm glow. The lead detective surveyed the scene with a trained, unflinching gaze, taking in the formal table, setting the steaming bowls and the tableau of guilty and innocent, frozen in a single high-stakes moment. "Sir, we received a report of attempted poisoning at this address." Detective Martinez addressed me directly, his tone calm but resolute. I straightened, relief washing over me in tidal waves as I placed a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Are you William Thompson?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Thank you for responding so quickly." Cleveland's protests erupted immediately, desperate and frantic. "This is ridiculous. What poisoning? We're having a family dinner." His voice cracked with a mixture of panic and disbelief. "Everyone step away from the dinner table." "Please," Detective Martinez instructed. His partner began collecting samples from each bowl, methodically focusing on mine. Evidence was being preserved while Cleveland's protests fell on deaf ears. Hope stood by the stove, pale and trembling, her lips parted as if words would betray her guilt. I don't understand what's happening," she whispered, her hands shaking uncontrollably, as a crime scene technician opened her carefully prepared herb container and documented its contents with methodical precision. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," the officer intoned. Detective Martinez approached Cleveland, handcuffs in hand. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." "Dad?" Cleveland's eyes met mine across the room as the metal clicked shut around his wrists. Years of planning, ambition, and twisted logic had culminated in this moment. I felt a strange, cold mix of rage, sorrow, and vindication. "How could you do this to your own family?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. The irony was almost unbearable. The son who had once clutched my hand in admiration, who had cried at his own milestones, now shackled by the very law I had built my life believing would protect the innocent. Ethan, clinging to my side, looked up at me, his small face pale but resolute. In that instant, I realized the depth of courage in his young heart and the dark lengths adults could descend to when ambition eclipsed conscience. The house, once filled with the comforting aroma of a family meal, was now a courtroom, a battlefield, and a crucible of revelation. "I could ask you the same question, son." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown a mirror, reflecting back the betrayal that had scarred my family. Hope's arrest followed swiftly, her nursing knowledge making her just as culpable in the meticulously orchestrated poisoning scheme. The sight of her in handcuffs escorted by officers was a bitter confirmation that love and loyalty could be so easily twisted into malice. Outside, our quiet suburban street had transformed into a tableau of chaos. Neighbors clustered on the sidewalks, drawn by flashing lights and the wail of police sirens, their hushed whispers carrying judgments and speculations about the shocking events unfolding behind closed doors. Cars blocked driveways, officers moved with precise coordination, and the once familiar tranquility was shattered. Ethan pressed closer to me, his small body seeking comfort and protection amidst the storm of emotions. I could feel the rapid beat of his heart against my side, his 10-year-old courage tempered by terror and disbelief. His parents were being led past us, their hands cuffed their faces, a mixture of anger, fear, and in Cleveland's case, something dangerously close to remorse. Cleveland paused mid-step, turning toward me with wide eyes, voice trembling. "Forgive me, Dad. I never meant for it to go this far." "You meant to kill me, Cleveland," I replied quietly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "That's exactly how far you intended it to go." My voice remained calm, but beneath it was the accumulation of decades of betrayal, ambition, and broken trust. The detective confirmed that Ethan could remain in my custody, shielding him from further trauma. And within the hour, we were driving away from the house that had once symbolized family and prosperity, now a place of betrayal and danger. Ethan, utterly spent by the night's upheaval, fell asleep in the passenger seat, his small body limp against the door, his face relaxed in the rare peace of slumber. 20 minutes later, I carried him into my Shaker Heights home, tucking him into the guest bedroom that for now would serve as his sanctuary. I placed the court date card in my jacket pocket, a silent reminder that the path to justice was only beginning. 8 days later, the Cuyahoga County Courthouse loomed before us like a solemn cathedral of law, its stone steps echoing the weight of what we were about to face. Ethan gripped my hand tightly as we ascended the stairs to the third-floor courtroom, his small fingers holding on as though drawing strength from my presence. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams. The bailiff's voice rang out, commanding the attention of families' attorneys and court personnel. We obeyed, rising in unison, the gravity of the moment pressing upon every shoulder. Across the aisle, Cleveland and Hope sat in subdued silence, the bright orange of their jumpsuits stark against the muted courtroom tones. The evidence against them hung in the air, like an unspoken indictment. The state of Ohio versus Cleveland Thompson and Hope Thompson attempted murder in the first degree. Judge Williams reviewed the charges with the measured authority that only years on the bench could provide, her gaze steady and unyielding. She nodded to the prosecutor. "Counselor, you may present your opening statement." The prosecution unfolded with deliberate precision laboratory reports confirming toxic substances in the soup samples, medical testimony linking my symptoms directly to the poisoning timeline, and physical evidence from Cleveland's kitchen that painted an undeniable portrait of premeditation. "Mr. Thompson, please state your relationship to the defendants," the prosecutor asked gently, guiding me through the formalities with practiced care. "Cleveland is my son. Hope is my daughter-in-law," I said, the words tasting surreal as they left my mouth. The courtroom seemed to blur around me. These were the same people who had once celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays with me, now standing as strangers cloaked in criminal intent. "Please tell the court what happened on the evening of June 12th. I drew a slow, steadying breath, the room silent except for the faint rustle of papers and the hum of the ventilation system. My mind retraced each horrifying moment, from the whispered warning of my grandson to the deliberate actions of my son and daughter-in-law, every detail seared into memory. The story I was about to tell was more than a narration of events. It was a reckoning, a testimony of betrayal, and a chronicle of the night my family fractured and justice began its slow, inevitable march. I recounted every harrowing detail to the court: the seemingly innocuous dinner invitation, the whispered warning from Ethan, and the desperate pressure to consume food I now knew had been laced with poison. My own son, my flesh and blood, had tried to end my life, motivated solely by the lust for control over the company I had built, with decades of sweat and sacrifice. If not for my grandson's courage, if not for his unflinching honesty, I would be dead, and the life I had carefully nurtured would have been stolen in a single, coldly calculated night. The defense attorney's attempts at cross-examination proved impotent against the overwhelming clarity of the evidence. "Mr. Thompson," he asked, voice dripping with feigned reason, "isn't it possible you misunderstood your grandson's innocent observation? 10-year-old children often imagine things. Surely he could have misheard something or misinterpreted a casual conversation." Ethan's testimony, delivered via closed-circuit television to shield him from the trauma of a courtroom confrontation, struck with unflinching precision. Beside him sat a victim's advocate offering reassurance and guidance, yet the courage in the boy's voice was unmistakable. "I heard Mom mixing something special for Grandpa," he stated plainly, the gravity of his words piercing the air. "Dad said it would make him too weak to run the company anymore. They were trying to hurt him, Grandpa. I didn't want them to." Every word was a dagger to the illusion of family trust, and the jury, confronted with such undeniable honesty, deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning their verdict, guilty on all counts. Judge Williams' sentencing carried the profound weight of moral authority. "Family relationships," she intoned, "are built on trust, love, and protection. You violated those sacred bonds for financial gain and personal ambition." Her gaze swept over Cleveland and Hope, unwavering. "I sentence each defendant to 8 years in state prison." Cleveland's final words, whispered and raw, echoed across the hushed courtroom. "Dad, forgive me. I lost my way completely. The plea rang hollow against the backdrop of their betrayal, yet it was a human moment within a legal reckoning. I watched as they were escorted from the courtroom, their orange jumpsuits a grim contrast to the family memories we had once shared. Justice had been served, yet I felt no satisfaction in seeing my son vanish behind bars, only a profound aching loss. 4 days later, I returned to the office at Thompson, manufacturing the familiar environment forever altered by the shadow of betrayal. I reviewed legal documents with a newly sharpened perspective. The photographs of past company milestones, once symbols of pride and accomplishment, now carried layers of caution and pain. Success meant little if those around you could not be trusted to honor the bonds of family and loyalty. My estate attorney spread out a new set of paperwork across the mahogany desk, where Cleveland had once scattered his demands for immediate control. These revisions were deliberate, necessary, and emotionally wrenching. Cleveland's name was removed from all corporate documents, ensuring that Ethan would inherit the company at the age of 25, guided by professional management until he was ready. Educational funds were established for Ethan, nurturing his growth and preparing him for business, but without pressure to join the company until he chose. At 4 o'clock, I drove to Edgewater Park, overlooking the shimmering expanse of Lake Erie. The evening sky bled into shades of gold and crimson, reflecting on the gentle waves below. Ethan and I settled into our familiar routine of watching the sunset, the boy leaning against me as we spoke quietly about his new life, his adjustment to living with his grandfather, and the slow, fragile rebuilding of our trust. The horizon stretched wide, promising a future we would navigate together, healing, cautious but filled with hope. The same lake view that had once framed long hours of business strategy now stretched before us as a serene canvas for healing conversations. The gentle lapping of water against the shoreline and the soft cries of distant gulls created a tranquility that contrasted sharply with the chaos of recent weeks. Grandpa Ethan's voice broke the comfortable silence, small but weighted with an unspoken fear. "Do you think Mom and Dad still love me?" His innocent question trembled under the burden of a child trying to comprehend adult betrayal, trying to reconcile love with acts of unimaginable cruelty. I drew him closer, my arm wrapping firmly around his shoulders, as we gazed across the lake boats drifting lazily on the shimmering water. "They love you very much," I reassured him, my voice steady yet tinged with the gravity of truth. "They made terrible choices about money, power, and control, but their love for you was never in question. Sometimes people lose sight of what matters most, and they let ambition cloud their judgment." We spoke long into the afternoon about his new school enrollment, the friendships he was beginning to build, and the weekend activities he now looked forward to. Each word, each laugh reminded me of the resilience children possess, the remarkable ability to find light even in the darkest shadows. Ethan's ability to smile, to play, and to hope, despite all that had happened, astonished me daily. "Will I run the company someday?" he asked, eyes wide, curiosity mingled with an earnest longing for guidance. I squeezed his shoulder gently. "Only if you want to. You'll have many choices, and I'll support whatever makes you happy. What matters most isn't the company, Ethan. It's the people you choose to surround yourself with, the trust and respect you build with them." The sunset unfurled across the horizon in hues of molten gold and soft amber, casting long reflections on the water as we sat together on our favorite bench. In that quiet moment, I realized the most important legacy I could leave him wasn't wealth nor power, but the understanding that real riches come from relationships grounded in trust, honesty, and love. Walking back to the car hand in hand, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. Justice had been served. Family bonds had been tested, fractured, and yet in the places that truly mattered, they had been strengthened. The future stretched out before us, a canvas of infinite possibility. Ethan's laughter, bright and unrestrained, echoed at my suggestion of ice cream for dinner, a reminder that some family traditions were worth preserving, while others needed to be created anew. We had work to do, hearts to mend, and a new kind of family legacy to build, one founded not on fear or ambition, but on trust, care, and the quiet power of choosing love above all else. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.